Hello, and welcome back to Practically Political. It is November 7th, 2025, day 38 of the government shutdown. By 3 days, we have set a record. Congratulations to everyone. Not. We will talk about that later in the show, but I'm joined with my usual partners in crime, Ashley Davis, Court Bardella, and plenty to talk about, folks. Obviously, we had a big election on Tuesday, and I'll get your thoughts in a minute. But one thing it shows is that when Donald Trump is on the ballot, Republicans do great. When he's not on the ballot, they do not do very well. I mean, look at 2017, 18, 19, 21, 22. They did much worse in the midterms. Almost every year, 23, and then 24, obviously they won. So the big question is, what does this mean? The one axiomatic thing in politics that it proves that nothing is forever, right? How many times in 2004 we had the enduring Republican majority with Karl Rove, then in 2008 Obama had a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate. It was Dems forever. Well, not so much. So here we are, and I think there are a lot of things to take away from this election. I will just point out a couple. I think one of the interesting trends is since a lot of these polls proved registered voters. They measured registered voters, but not likely voters. That's one of the reasons why. Remember, it was going to be 2 or 3 points in the gubernatorial race, and Cheryl run in New Jersey by 13. She blew him out of the water. And I think also a trend which does not bode well for the GOP is that a lot of the particularly Hispanic, but voters of color and younger voters who went to the GOP in 24 migrated back big time. If you look at some of the Latino heavy counties in New Jersey, I mean that was proven in spades. And again, we talked about this in the show over the summer, but this redistricting thing in Texas, I think, is going to blow up for them because it's based heavily on a lot of these Latino voters staying in the Republican column. But anyway, so that's an interesting point as well. So we'll see what happens, but obviously a good night for Dems. Are they out of the woods? No. And obviously we talked about the individual races in a minute, but I'd just love to get your thoughts overall. What say you, Kurt?
I think a couple of things can be true at the same time. One, I completely agree, and data has shown that when Donald Trump's name isn't on the ballot, Republicans have a major turnout problem. That the unique coalition of voters that Trump has been able to cobble together, where people who aren't high propensity voters will come out and actually vote in a presidential election for him, they have no interest in showing up in an off year election, to be sure, and potentially the midterm election. So that trend seems to be holding true. And I think that's the biggest challenge for Republicans looking ahead. If anything, Trump is kind of a political lame duck when it comes to turnout mechanisms. Not at all discounting his current influence and his hold over the party. I'm saying as a mechanism to turn out voters. And create that urgency that I think his coalition feels when his name is on the ballot. Republicans haven't figured out a way to transfer that over to anyone else other than Donald Trump. That's going to be a really big problem for them. Number two, I noticed that Republicans in the midterms are in this 2025 off year election, whether it's in New York to Virginia, across the board, we heard a lot of conversation about the New York City mayoral candidate, now mayor-elect Mamdani, and we heard a lot about Attorney General candidate, Jay Jones's text messages. What I didn't hear from Republicans was anything really talking about the economy. And I feel like they fell into the same trap that Democrats fell into back in 2024, which was ignoring the elephant in the room. James Carville's adage in 92, it's the economy, stupid, really rings true to this day. And it's been interesting watching that role reversal of how Biden and Democrats struggled with the economy and messaging it and inflation in 24. And now Republicans, they don't quite have it all figured out right now. And I think that's part of the reason why we saw what happened this past Tuesday was the Republicans, they told you who to be scared of. They told you to be watch out for the socialists. They told you the hypocrisy of Democrats not dumping Jay Jones. They didn't tell you what they were for, what they would do for you. And I think that backfired on them tremendously.
No, and I agree. And by the way, this is a problem that the Dems had with Obama too, right? They could never carry the Obama coalition to two other elections, and they lost the House in 2010. They lost the Senate in 2014. So, and The only thing I would add before you jump in, Ashley, is that a lot of my Trumpy friends were a little bit surprised by what happened on Tuesday. And my response was, duh, because not only are Trump's policies unpopular, but and not only was he not paying attention to what he said he was going to do when he got elected, it's like he didn't even care. He was throwing Halloween parties at Mar-a-Lago and, redoing the East Wing of the White House and hopping all over the world, but he wasn't really focusing on the reason many people thought that he was elected. And you saw a little bit of the Bidenomics thing. Don't believe your wallet, believe me, right? And people just aren't buying that. But what say you, Ashley?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think Trump should have been more involved in those 2 races because I think it would have even maybe been worse,
Right.
because because, I mean, neither of those places he was going to play well. But listen, I think my biggest takeaway of it listen, I don't think Republicans are ready to, like, jump off a bridge yet, but I think that it was a good lesson, about exactly what you're talking about, which is the economy. Obviously, the markets are doing well, but, like, are eggs still expensive? Or beef, I think, is what's really expensive the most, not just eggs as much. But my point is groceries in general. And so I think that you saw them at least pivot a little bit since Tuesday, starting to realize that the economy is such a big deal. But my biggest takeaway is that the numbers that both the women governors elects won by, first of all, I think it's amazing that there's 2 new women Republican governors, no matter which side of the aisle. But the New Jersey especially, I mean, like, I think it was almost 15 points, Dave. I'll have to go back and with all the ballots,
Oh,
can't but as of
I
Wednesday
thought it
morning,
was
it was
15 in New Jersey. I mean, 15 in Virginia, 13 in New Jersey, but
or
I could
was
be
it
wrong.
13? Okay. Anyway, it's a huge number, and obviously in Virginia, Spanberger just brought everyone along. I mean, the 8 House seats, obviously all 3 statewide seats. So, uh I think I'm not ready to say, "Oh, we're gonna lose the midterms yet." I mean, remember when Glenn Youngkin won and then the Democrats won all the elections a year later, but it's a good lesson, and I think this is what I love about our country and democracy. If you're mad, go to the polls and vote, and it makes a difference, and so if you're mad at Trump, you just went and voted, and you got different candidates in, and this is what democracy is about.
Absolutely. And I think it will be interesting to see going forward because the best Republican strategist I heard say, well, the canary in the coal mine is dead, but the miners are still alive.
Hmm.
So I do think they have time to turn it around. And let's face it, I still say if the Supreme Court strikes down tariffs, which it looks like they're going to do, though they've given good signals before that haven't come through, but assuming they do that, it's going to be the best thing for Trump. It's going to help the economy. And if you have a strong economy a year from now, and there's been no major shakeups, things could be very, very different. So I think that they should be confident, the Dems, but I don't think they should be cocky. And I think that, yeah,
Democrats should never be cocky,
no,
ever.
Well, neither
no.
should Republicans, but I do think too, though, what the and we said this last week, the Mondami movement, though, is amazing. I mean, you haven't seen that since Obama. I mean, obviously Trump does it, but there was a movement there. His coalition of voters was so interesting. And so the people like that come around, not very often, but also they have to come around at a time when people want change, and people wanted change in New York, and we'll see what happens. I think that, obviously a lot of his policies are gonna be up to the state to have to fund or local boards, but, it will just be interesting how he does, kind of run the city. But you saw his transition team. It was very interesting.
Well, I hope
All
so.
women, all women.
I have to say that I was a little disappointed in his acceptance speech because I thought it was a chance to really reach across the aisle and reach out to all New Yorkers. I don't think he did that. I also thought it was petulant and immature and showing very little class the way he ridiculed Andrew Cuomo and then he even quoted Mario Cuomo about the prose and the poetry. And I just think he's better than that. And I know a couple of people that want to give him the benefit of the doubt, fellow New Yorkers who thought that he was off to a bad start. I think that if Michael Bloomberg couldn't deal with the Department of Education in New York, Mamdani is going to be like a fly flying into one of the snappers. He's just going to get absolutely annihilated. Again, look, I love New York. It's my home. I want him to succeed. But in one dynamic I will mention is I talked to a couple of people that voted for him, because you look at the age gap, right? To me, that's the interesting things. You had like young women who were under 30 that voted for him by like 60 points.
Yeah.
And women over 65 that voted against him by 20 something points. And it shows a couple things. The macro trend it shows is that, which I agree, that we spend too much on the old in this country and not enough on the young. And that's reflected in how many young people feel that they won't live the American dream. They're not going to make as much as their parents, all that. Scott Galloway has been doing a great tour talking about just the plight of young men. I encourage people to listen to what he's saying. But in any case, and the other thing was some of his policies I think are just junk, right? And I said, well, I mean, he wants to open like 5 grocery stores in 5 boroughs. And they're like, yeah, but it shows that he's willing to experiment. It shows that he's willing to try new things, to tackle affordability. And I think that's what people like. There's this same with Obama, this hope, like anything's possible with this guy. It's a new era. But what do you guys think? How about you, Kurt?
Well, reality steps in, and it's, like,
Yeah,
hard to get stuff done, right? I mean,
right.
this is why no one believes politicians in my mind, because you can run
No,
on all
we
the,
can't. Was it we
butterflies and
campaigned?
rainbows.
We
Right.
campaign in poetry. We govern in prose was the old adage.
Yes. Right.
Yeah, and I think
Mario
that's going
Cuomo
to
said
be,
that.
and that's going to be the thing. How much can Mandami translate from the promises he made? Very bold. I mean, no matter whether you agree or disagree, they're very bold pronouncements. Can he back any of that up, and what does that look like? And or will he gain points with the public by just trying? And if he gets a buzzsawed by the establishment, and to me, these things are much more about establishment and young versus old than right versus left, or
Mhm.
left versus far left, or right versus far right. I think that is generational, and if he tries to do some of these things, free busing and expanding access to food, and limiting the income gap as much as he can.
Or rent freezing. That's a terrible idea.
A terrible idea, but very popular. If you are a renter in New York, which is a lot of people, you're like, that's not the worst idea I've ever heard.
Yeah, yeah,
And
exactly.
and so he will get credit for having an idea that I think will be popular, but there'll be no way to actually institute it. And so you get credit for the thing without actually having to do it.
No, I completely agree, and, I also think you're 100% right, Kurt, that, this is a young versus old, and the excitement, this is what makes you nervous when people say, "Oh, when Republicans say we would love to run against AOC." She brings out excitement, and she brings out the young vote that otherwise will probably most likely stay home. I mean, you look at the vote that Trump got on the young voters because of the Charlie Kirk, because of that whole movement. So there was something that struck a chord, and that's exactly what AOC does. That's exactly what Mamdami does. And to energize that group of people, I think someone like her would be very difficult to run against.
Yeah, I think too for Democrats, um, if I were the Republicans, I would not want to run against someone who is clearly a messaging communications guru. I mean, that's the job of president more than anything is communications and your ability to connect with the American people. And anybody who can incite and excite a base of people that may not ordinarily participate in our process, that is a very formidable person. We are living in a world now where we already know how 30% of the country is going to vote one way. We know 30% of the country is going to vote for the other. No matter what, no matter whose name is up there, they will always vote one way. So for that rest of the group of people that exists, the only way you can win is by expanding the universe of voters who participate in the process and grabbing those new people, because it's like a double benefit if you could get those people to vote. AOC can do that. Mandami can do that. Donald Trump can do that. I have not seen anyone else yet that can do that as effectively as those three political figures.
And that's really true if you look back at every presidential election. And this is why I think Bernie Sanders was not electable. But you have to be able to steal votes from the other side. Biden did it very well against Trump in 2020 because he was the return to normalcy, the more
Yeah.
pragmatic guy. Obviously, Trump did it. People thought he was the most moderate Republican. Obama did it. Everyone did it. Bush had compassionate conservatism, right? Clinton was the new Democrat.
Hmm.
So, and I think that's really true. And when you look at the so-called low propensity voters, as you say, Kurt, have really become the key to the elections because the bases on either side are so locked in. But well, I think we need to talk a little bit about the dear
Are we
old government
sponsored
shut.
by Sonic now? Is that why you took a drink of that, Kurt?
No, actually, I took a drink because I got something caught in my throat.
No, Kurt.
Actually,
Kurt brought up his son.
it's Fuji.
Well,
Oh, you
Fiji
Kurt,
and
didn't.
look at
Sonic.
Kurt's.
I didn't. Kurt was so good. I didn't even see him take a drink.
I'm a pro. I'm no Marco
You are a
Rubio. I know how
pro.
to
You're through
subtly
to the
do it.
nine for sure. But in any case, so as we mentioned, it's day 38 of the shutdown. I think if anything, the Dems are more emboldened. As I've said before, I think they could have taken a win a few weeks ago with the insurance issue on the table, but here we are. And so
I think
now
they're
I really think it's in the president's interest, excuse me, in the president's interest to solve this. And if I were he, I would say, okay, we'll extend the Obamacare subsidies, maybe do it just for 2 years, maybe phase out some of the higher income strata, something like that, and then be done with it. And he could claim a win. But I just don't, I think it's on the onus, particularly after this election, it's on the Republicans. And Republican strategists might have warned the party that if before the election, canceling the tunnel in New Jersey and telling all these employees in Virginia that they might not get back pay probably wasn't the best strategy. But given all that, I think it's now the onus is more on the Republicans to, particularly the president, to solve it. But what do you think, Ashley?
Yeah, I think I'm watching like what's happening right this minute when the senators on both sides of the aisle are trying to get together for just a small package of 3 bills, and they're having trouble just getting that kind of cobbled together. I don't think we're gonna solve the healthcare subsidy issue before the government reopens because I think it's gonna take a little bit of time. And so if there has to be some guarantee that some of the moderate Democrats who wanna reopen, not even moderate, but just Democrats that wanna reopen, that they'll definitely get a vote. But you heard what the speaker said. He's like, "I'm not gonna guarantee a vote." Now, he may have to change that and pass this with a bunch of Democrats, but it's not gonna be we can't just flip a switch right now and do subsidies. It's gonna take a couple weeks of negotiations because there's no way, no matter what, that Republicans are gonna let this just be a complete extension. They're gonna have to have an off ramp. It's in some form or fashion. We've been talking about this for a long time, whether it's a income threshold or whatever. Maybe the off ramp is 2 years. I mean, I don't know what those details are going to be yet, but I think the government has to reopen as that's being negotiated because otherwise, I mean, Kurt and I were talking at the beginning. I mean, all of us were. I mean, the plane situation is kind of like a big deal. Not kind of, it
Well,
is.
that's what helped
And
them to shut down last time was the whole ATC thing. Yeah.
well, and you look at like we're a couple weeks away from Thanksgiving time, and
Oof.
I've always felt that this shutdown wasn't going to get anywhere near a resolution until it got real for everyday Americans. Up to this point, unless you're a federal worker, you really haven't been impacted by the shutdown in your day-to-day life. You're not really thinking about it. But now it gets real because everyday things are about to get disrupted. And when that happens, that has a chain reaction, and it all ends up with the American people pissed at their elected representatives on both sides of the aisle, frankly. I've always believed that the shutdown game is a plague on both their houses. I always think that the party that is in the majority takes the bigger blunt of it, just by you got the majority. You have the perception that you're in charge, and most people, they don't know what the filibuster is. They don't know that there's a 60 vote threshold in the Senate. They're not paying attention that closely, frankly, to the mechanics of how the House and Senate function. And so, I think that for a long time, Republicans felt like we can get this is great. We're going to be able to fire a bunch of federal workers, and we're going to undo federal spending, and we're gonna run roughshod over everybody. This is gonna be fantastic. And then reality hit them on Tuesday, and it's really the first reality check that I feel like the Republicans have had, since when the election happened in the first place, and uh, they're in a really tough spot. And I think that the best case for Democrats is to start negotiating directly with the president and cut the Senate Republicans out of the loop completely. Because if Trump agrees to a deal, and Trump is a consummate guy looking for a deal, then it's kind of game over. And Trump already angered Senate Republicans by going out there and saying that they've lost the shutdown. I mean, that was completely contrary to the messaging of every Republican until the president himself yesterday walks out there and goes, "Well, we've lost the shutdown. We're getting slaughtered out there." The president's already set a goalpost of how this is playing. It's clear he wants this over.
Yeah, and trying to argue for the end of the filibuster, that's not helping his relations either. But
Yeah.
what do you think in terms of how long this is going to last? I can't believe that it would drag through Thanksgiving. I think that just the potential of
No, Thanksgiving's the
nightmare.
27th of November,
Right.
so
So
that's
I
for
think I
basically
think
three
we
weeks
get
from now. I think it's around the 19th, 18th, 19th is when this gets done.
I think I wanna see what happens this weekend. Does the Senate really stay? And do we get enough Democrats to vote for this 3 package deal? I think that will be a big,
Yeah, well, it's a
but then
3-day
we
weekend. Veterans Day on Monday. They're all gonna get a Dodge, I
well,
bet.
Veterans Day is on Tuesday, which is so weird. I don't quite
yeah,
Oh yeah,
understand
Tuesday.
that.
Tuesday,
So they'll really be out of Dodge.
well,
Yeah.
that's what they're concerned about right now is an attendance problem. Even if Thune keeps them in, do they just go home anyway?
If can and, what will be really interesting is if you have a bunch of senators trying to get out of DC and they can't because flights get canceled, then they're stuck there doing live interviews with CNN and DCA.
Yeah, they'll be interviewing senators, at the clogged areas, but in front of the gate with people sleeping on the seats and all that wonderful airport uh, congestion scenes that
If
you
you're a member
see.
of Congress who has to go through one of the top 40 major airport hubs, I would very much encourage you to drive or not leave at all. Like that could be
I
that
think
could be
practically
devastating PR wise if you see a bunch of lawmakers who are trapped in airports.
I think that practically political should get an airplane, and so the 3 of us don't have to ever go to an airport.
There
Now
we
you're talking.
go.
Where's
Dave,
the
you're in
jet?
We
charge.
can bop
Yeah,
around the country and
I mean he's got a
see
boat, so
whomever,
now we need a
whenever.
plane.
Yeah, exactly. We'd be like Bernie Sanders and AOC.
Yeah,
They're happy to hop around in their private jet.
yeah.
Exactly. It would be great, PR because we could put practically political on the
Oh, on the side of the
wings.
plane.
On
Absolutely.
the
Yeah.
side of the plane,
Well,
yeah, of
speaking of
course.
that, that's a perfect segue into the final topic, and that is you may have heard that Bill Gates came out and essentially revised his climate change scenario.
Yes.
And this is something that's always gotten up my craw because I know people that have worked in the environment and on climate issues, and I've always felt, look, you have the deniers like the Donald Trumps, which I think is so ridiculous to think that we could transfer huge amounts of carbon from underground to the ocean and to the air and not have it affect the climate. Then you had the doomsdayers, who, oh my God, the world's going to end in 2020. Then you had the realists, which I put myself in, where yes, the carbon problem is very real. Yes, we need to do something, but we don't have to solve it tomorrow. And I think our strategy should be to avoid the unmanageable and manage the unavoidable, right? And that's what I think we're doing. If you look at most utilities, I know Southern Energy, Constellation, some of the bigger companies, by 2045 or 2050, they're going to be all alternative fuels or alternative sources. So I think we're getting there. Trump is trying to throw a wrench in the cogs by slowing things down, but I think it's inexorable. So I think we're at least on a realistic path. I think we have 30 to 50 years, but I'd love to hear I've given my thoughts. What do you folks think?
That's interesting. I'm sorry to cut you off there, Ashley. I kind of feel like this is one of those things where it's like shifting targets, and it's almost like a fad. In the 2010s, everything was about, renewable sources of energy, whether it was, and solar obviously had its moment in the sun, no pun intended. Um, I think the challenge of this decade and the next decade actually is energy consumption because of how much AI requires and the rapid expansion and use of AI. And so when I look at the future of some of what we're talking about here, battery storage and battery capacity, I think is the ball game for the immediate present. And that is something that right now I could tell you, there are major efforts underway within Department of Defense, particularly convening a number of task forces, bringing in experts from all over the world to talk about how are we going to have the battery capacity and the battery storage to power the AI revolution that's happening. And mind you, the majority of lithium, which is the main source we use right now for batteries, that is mined in the world, is controlled by China. And so this is also a national security situation. We had a lot of conversation the last couple of years about chips and Taiwan. Let me tell you, battery, lithium, rare earth minerals, Africa and China are going to be hotspots for that.
Well, absolutely. That's why kind of the whole tariff issue with China is happening with over the I mean, some of the sticking points are obviously rare earth. I don't know. Listen, I don't really I think that people like Bill Gates, just like when celebrities endorse candidates, like why is Bill Gates all of a sudden the expert on the environment? I know he spent a lot of money and time, but so going back to that, I think it was very big of him to change his mind because he's been the biggest climate, the world's falling apart there is. I mean, my son was taught in elementary school, like scared them to death. They said they were going to be like, everyone's going to die in 15 years. So, I mean, like there was a sky is falling type of atmosphere. But listen, that's why I think to try to get off the rare earth issue though, Kurt, that's why so many people are investing in nuclear again. I mean, who would have thought after 3 Mile Island that we would have ever been investing in nuclear and small nuclear reactors that can be built? So there is energy to me is the new gold or the new oil or whatever it is, and it's going to continue to be that way. But is it going to be renew? Is it going to continue down the renewable path? At least 80% of it. Hopefully.
Yeah, well, here's what we do know too is we have a capacity issue. We have too many people who need energy and not enough energy to meet their capacity, especially in states like Texas where we see what happens when the grid has too much pressure and stress on it, it can't meet it. So this is going to have to get resolved at some point in the next 25 years when you look at where migrating patterns are, where humans are literally locating to. Um, we don't have, and here's the truth, we don't have the answer for that, and that is alarming. That when you actually play it out, I can't tell you 25 years from now what the main source of power that's going to power the grid in Texas, one of the largest states and most populous states in the union is.
Well, all I can say is that this is another area where China is doing it right. Because I've always believed we should fire on all cylinders. And we've talked about this before, but it seems like you have one party that was against fossil fuels and one party that was against alternative fuels. Biden, to his credit, particularly the second part of his administration, said, let's do both. Drill, baby, drill, and let's go full speed ahead on alternatives. That's what we should be doing. And frankly, nuclear too. China's building a record number of coal power plants. They're building a record number of solar panels, and they're building a record number of nuclear plants. And we should have, there's no reason when you consider how safe the nuclear reactors are these days. We've never lost a single person. I don't think 3 Mile Island, what, one person died, maybe. And I know there was that accident in Japan that scared a lot of people, but still, it's very, very safe. And we should be getting 20 or 30% of our power from nuclear. But
Well, you
anyway,
like to think that a lot's come along since 1979 in terms of our
yes,
ability to
you
be more
one
safe.
one would certainly help. Well, I think we're going to have to leave it there. Another great dialogue as always, and thanks to all of you for joining us on Practically Political. We look forward to seeing you next time, and happy November to everyone.